You're listening to Product-Led Revenue, brought to you by Correlated. In each episode, you'll hear first-hand advice and tactics from SaaS, sales, and revenue leaders about using product signals to drive expansion and revenue growth. Let's jump in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Product-Led Revenue. I'm Breezy Beaumont, and this episode is brought to you by Correlated, a customer expansion platform for B2B software companies that focus on product-led growth. Today, our guest is Rajan Sheth, partner at Hypergrowth, which is an advisor to growth stage companies, formerly the VP of Growth and Self-Service Business at JumpCloud, and also previously head of growth, go-to-market, and marketing at Heroku. So clearly quite the resume there. Rajan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Breezy, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm super excited.
Awesome. So to give our audience some background on yourself, can you tell us kind of about your current role and maybe about JumpCloud as well?
Yeah, definitely. So historically, I have had a weird career path. I was a developer in my past life. I moved to product for a while, and then onto marketing and the sales side for some time. And since the last decade or so, I've been running and building growth organizations from ground up. And what I realized is that my background in development as a software developer in product, as well as sales and marketing, helps me gel the growth role and look at it from the whole customer journey perspective. And I'll give you my current role. So I'm also a partner at Hypergrowth. We advise early, mid-stage companies, and we help them on the growth side of the world across product, marketing, as well as the whole strategy. Formerly, I was the VP of Growth and Self-Service Business at JumpCloud. And for folks who don't know what JumpCloud is, it's a cloud directory platform for identity, access, and device management. And my role there was I was leading the growth product and engineering teams. And imagine everything from signups up to retention, how to get the users use the platform more, how to get them adopted, how to get them to monetization and expansion and retention. Everything was within the team's charter. Before that, I was at Heroku, and I was there at Heroku for around 6 years, little over 6 years, actually. And over a period of time, I led the entire self-service business from acquisition, adoption, monthly active users, monetization, expansion, upsell, cross-sell, and retention side of the world. And super excited to be here and discussing some of the tactics that we have found successful.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to dig in primarily, I think, on this episode at Heroku. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack there. And even on that list of things that you're owning, there's obviously some crossover on looking at cross-sell and upsell and expansion between those two roles. So I'm sure it will naturally come into the conversation. But talking about Heroku, before we dive in too far and talk about sort of the things that you're executing on, for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know what Heroku is, can you give them some background on the problem that they're solving?
For folks who don't know what Heroku is, it's a cloud platform that lets companies build from an idea to an application within minutes. And it's an entire development platform offering compute, runtime, as well as database services and the entire CI/CD platform. So think of it as a layer on top of AWS, which makes the task of DevOps team and development teams much, much easier.
Okay, got it. Very cool. So a lot of big problems to solve there, but also a large market to serve in solving that. So talk about, let's dig in a little bit on sort of what were your primary objectives and sort of what you were hoping to achieve at Heroku, and what was the scale of growth from your time when you started there to, when you decided to move on?
Yeah, so I was there at Heroku for 6 years. It's a long time for a fast-growing company. When I joined Heroku, we were around 50 million ARR. We were PLG first company. So most of our usage as well as the acquisition came from developers, word of mouth, development communities, and the product was built really well. And 90 to 100% of our ARR was self-service at that point, product-led. And the initial goal that when I joined 6 years ago was, how do we get the right developers who would eventually pay for the platform? And when I joined, we saw a lot of hobbyists, a lot of students, and a lot of individual developers building personal applications who are signing up for Heroku. And as a company, we definitely want to cater to these because they would eventually join a company and they would take Heroku with them. But we also wanted to have a dedicated singular focus on how do we elevate the messaging positioning of Heroku and go after developers in a team-based environment, SMB, mid-market, and eventually scale to enterprise. So that was a big focus. And when I joined, we were getting around 10,000 to 15,000 signups a month. That's a huge number. But the way
Wow.
we built that acquisition engine over a period of time, hugely focused on SEO. We usually focused on influencers in the developer communities. We did partnership with incubators and accelerators to get our word out in those cloud native startups who would start building on Heroku because that's the problem that we solve. And over a period of time, by the time I left last year, we were getting around 150,000 signups a month. And a huge portion of them were companies who were using Heroku in a professional setting. And some of the big brands would sign up just product led and then expand within their organization.
Wow. What was the team structure that reported to you at Heroku? What did that look like?
So I've had a very interesting journey at Heroku. I'll start with a summary. At Heroku, I reported under the CMO when we were solving the top of the funnel problem. I reported under head of online business or marketing, CMO, and then also under the CEO and the product side of the world for some time as we were solving adoption, activation, and the usage side of the problem. And I've also reported to Heroku in the later parts under the CRO, so that as the team had responsibility on the revenue as well as the monetization aspect side of it. So the reporting structure shifted. But initially, when I joined, I was reporting under the marketing organization, and our goal was getting the signup. So the team consists of demand generation, marketing technology, as well as focused growth managers focused on conversion rates, optimization, and activation side of the work.
Got it. I laugh because it's a classic growth. Anyone with growth in their title is always a toss up of kind of where you land in the org and the various problems that you're solving. And they tend to shift a lot over time. So, as someone who also has the head of growth title over here, I definitely understand that you can be wearing a couple different hats at different times in that during
Yeah.
that process. And so, all right, let's talk about the acquisition engine then. So, how are you looking at sort of building this quality pipeline for acquisition over time?
Yeah. So there are a few aspects. One is singular focus on the ICP. We need to know who are the customers who are going to pay us. And especially as a PLG company, you attract a lot of signups if there is a product market fit. And naturally for Heroku, there was a product market fit for developers. And the first thing that we did was identify from the customers who are paying us, who are these customers? And it was natural that 95% of our ARR came from that single segment of developers in SMB mid-market who were focused on using Heroku in the team-based environment, not as an individual contributor, not as a student, as a hobby project also. So the number one thing was, where do we find these developers? And we did a huge gamut of things from the acquisition side. We partnered with several developer platforms. We went to several developer events, but few of them that turned out to be really well for us was our focus on SEO. That was a huge investment from several different teams during the initial days. And as I look back and see when we were getting around 150,000 signups a month in the last year when I was there, 60% of them actually came from SEO and organic. And the other huge part was direct because of the brand that we had built over time in the developer community. And some of the other strategic bets that we did was more around partnering with incubators, accelerators like Y Combinators, 500 accelerators, as well as running acquisition programs on the paid side with a singular focus on getting those professional team-based developers into the platform and using them. That was the key acquisition strategy. The other part that we changed was the metrics. So historically, before I joined, we were measuring acquisition by signups. And signups are worthless if they don't do anything. And the number one metric that we changed was quality signups, which means that the signups need to activate or do the meaningful aha moment within the first 7 days. And that was the metric we moved towards and we started measuring because it informed everything that we did up funnel with that. That was on the acquisition side of the world.
Got it. And you said the aha moment that, time to value is such a crucial metric. I'm curious, were you part of the team on figuring out what that moment was?
Yeah, and actually it changed multiple times as we became a more robust platform. Initially, it was users who signed up and deployed an application within the first 7 days. As we became a little bit more mature as an organization, it changed to users who did some meaningful activity. And what we did working with the data engineering team is identify those key activities across the different segments of the platform, across the different personas that we cater to, and how users would use our platform. If they're using our compute or runtime platform, then there are different events that we track. If they're using our database products, then we track some different events. If they're using some of our collaboration products like CI, CD, etc., then we track some of those. So we created a whole hierarchy of the overall metric of monthly active user, what are the different product surface areas that we want to cover, and what are the events underneath each of them, which are meaningful. So if you do that and come back a second time, then we considered you as an active user, which we counted as part of activation overall. So it changed and became more mature from starting with one singular deployment event to like around 80 other events over a period of time.
Oh, wow. And was this all built out, combining both things that people were doing in the product, but then was it also based on each persona that you had kind of teased out of that ICP?
Yeah, so it was based on persona, but it was also based on how the same persona would use the product differently. So think of it as not every developer is in charge of deploying an application. Some are just reviewing the application, some are just committing a PR to an application and collaborating on that, which are very different. Similarly, there are different products. You would use a database product differently than you would use a compute product. And those were the things that allowed us to measure things differently for different personas and the products that we
Got it. And we're starting to touch on this, but the term people are using a lot today is this idea of product qualified leads or PQLs. Were you using, it sounds like you were using PQLs. So what did that look like for you all?
Yeah, so PQL for us meant many different things. And we called, back in the days, we called them high value actions, which now there is an industry term, we call it PQLs. So for us, those meant many different things. For example, we had a high value action or a PQL defined at the point of sign up, identifying based on the intent data, based on who they are, what they want to do. But at the same time, we had high value actions or PQL across the customer journey. Think of it as some users that are, some prospects are more important based on their intent and who they are. But as they start using the platform, they become more important. And that's how we defined it. So PQL signal at the sign up, then we had defined some usage activities along the journey, even if they are free, and how fast they're using the breadth and the depth of the platform. And then for us, it was also the monetization part. So the volume of our paying customer was so much that sales team cannot own all the paying customers. So my team owned almost 90% of our paying customer, which is the self-serve customers. And from there, we identified the signals around who's growing fast, who are these users, and then flag it for our sales team for more of an enterprise conversion from self-service and expansion side of the world. So we use PQLs in many different ways based on usage, based on whether they are using what plugins, what billing data we have from them, and we used all of them to identify multiple touch points across the customer journey.
Got it. So you have these PQLs built, and it's across the entire customer lifecycle, customer journey. Let's talk a little bit about the tooling and the tech stack that you had to be able to pull that off.
Yeah. I wish it were simpler back in the days and something available out of the box, right? But we had a really good data engineering team and we had a good partnership with our analytics and the business operations team. And what we did was we piped a lot of our product usage data from the usage activities into our data warehouse. And we also did the same thing from our marketing data, put them into data warehouse. We did the same thing for our billing data and the sales data from our Salesforce instance. And data warehouse was our single source of truth, not Salesforce, not marketing automation platform, or not something else. And then we had built a business visualization platform. We use Looker and then Tableau on top of that so that we identify who are these users and we can marry and stitch all the data end to end. And that was a huge effort. It didn't happen overnight. It took more than a year to build all those things. And of course, we always continue to evolve that by adding something like Clearbit for enrichment, something like MadGuru for lead scoring for some of our platforms. So we did that over a period of time as we found the right use case. But for all the PLG experts out there, it is very different tech stack than you have for your B2B sales-led motion, where a marketing automation platform and a CRM is fine. This takes this at a whole different level. And there's a huge effort involved from many different teams versus just one growth team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you are doing then too is what we're starting to hear correlated from a lot of companies is having that data warehouse be your single source of truth, and then really building things out of there. So, obviously correlated specific, which I try not to do too much on the podcast, but correlated specific, we are building then on top of that data warehouse, right? To hopefully what took you a year to pull off in creating these different signals and being able to test them and see what's working and what are the outcomes of them and getting them into the hands of the right people to follow up. So hopefully we're able to as we grow correlated, shrink that time and make it, maybe
Yes,
hopefully just a week or a couple weeks for you to be able to do that. So,
that would be
but
game
it is
changing.
crazy to hear how you built that out.
Yes.
Yeah, very cool. Let's get into some upsell and expansion. So you use your data warehouse and spend all this time building out, getting all the data and insights and everything that's going to be interesting. Now you're surfacing those signals to the right folks. So the problems that I'm assuming then you're trying to solve here are how can we do better with upsell and expansion, which are crucial pieces of a product-led growth company. So let's talk about kind of your approach to solving those problems or opportunities,
Yeah,
I guess.
definitely. This is an interesting topic. Before that, I'll give a little bit context on the Heroku side so that the viewers have an understanding of what upsell and cross-sell means for us. So Heroku was acquired by Salesforce 12 years ago, and we still operated independently. So we are part of Salesforce, but we have our own customer base, we have our own product, our own tech stack. On top of that, Heroku started PLG. So as I said, more than 90% of our paying customers are not touched by the sales team until they become more important. And they continue to pay self-service monthly. And the growth team was responsible for growing their MRR and expanding that MRR on self-service side. The way expansion and upsell works for us is we have the self-service, the growth team, then we have the enterprise AEs, and in the middle, we have our online sales team. These are technical engagement managers helping our self-service customers, some of the cream of the cream self-service customers, identify their use case, and then helping them move on to the enterprise offering as they graduate and become ready for it. The goal is not to just convert everyone from self-service to enterprise. The goal is to identify and evaluate the use cases. So for the growth team, we had two opportunities. One is how do we identify the self-service customers and put them in front of our online or the technical sales team so that they can help grow them month to month, and then identify the right opportunities to expand the self-service customer and move them into an enterprise plan based on who they are and what their need is. So those were two different motions for us. And For us, identifying those upsell signals was a multi-dimensional approach. So think of it as the pricing for Heroku. We are consumption-based pricing. We also have multiple product lines in it, and we offer multiple features. All of them generate revenue, additional revenue for our users. So it's a land and expand play. Once they start using one feature or one platform, then we help them grow and scale on that based on the usage. But then we also identify opportunities based on data. If you're using this, you should also be using that. And at that point, we differentiate from the enterprise offering that, oh, you are in this particular space, which is which would need more security and compliance. Maybe you should have these XYZ features on our enterprise plan, and you should have that conversation to see if that's the right fit for you. So we used our pricing model as our guideline for expansion as from the self-service as well as on the sales side. And everything was based on data and the usage side of the world.
Got it. So it's like you're sort of getting in front of what would hypothetically kind of maybe come to fruition down the line anyways, but getting in front of it and letting the customer know, hey, here's where you might be able to get more value. And here's, of people who are approaching this in a similar way, i.e. using our platform in a similar way to you, here's how they might be able to get more value out of it. And therefore you could do the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's a myth, right? That people think that they're going to find their way eventually, but it's not always the case. Like they would drop off if they don't have the use case, if they don't realize that your platform offers that. And a majority of the times, what I've seen is that it's the awareness problem that they need this, and we offer that. Because as a high growth company, we continuously improve on the product offering we have. We continuously introduce new features and new products for the customers to use for different use cases. But it's not always understood by our existing customers on how they can leverage it and when they should be using it. I think that's the gap we solved by using the data, getting in front of the existing customers, and being very, very targeted and specific. It was not like a generic thing, hey, you should buy this enterprise offering. It's like you are using this, you may benefit from trying out something, and because we have seen this pattern.
Yeah, I think there's a strong feeling from a lot of folks that developers don't want to hear from salespeople or don't want to hear from your company. But I mean, if you're adding value in this way, it seems like they were open to this conversation. I mean, I guess what did you see on your end?
And you're right. I think our goal was not to sell. Our goal was to add value to their existing work and how to make their job easier. And I think that was the main focus for us. So for us, it was not that, hey, buy this or buy that. Try this. Because you're using this, you may also want to try using that. And if they find value in it, they would buy from us. So developers are not hesitant to respond or not hesitant to read emails from you if you add value to their life and to their workflow. But if you try to just sell, then they would turn a blind eye to what you're doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you touched on some of the different types of data that you were pulling in and that your team was looking at, but do you mind diving in a little bit more specifically and into all the different types of data that we're sort of pulling into those different signals?
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, we had very different motions. We had a motion for monetization to identify free users and what cohort of our free users are ready to convert to a paying customer self-service, but also identify who should be put into front of the sales team, because we don't want to lose out an opportunity. So we use a multiple dimensional approach. One was identifying the intent and the technographic, firmographic, as well as the demographic information of our users. So for example, if 50 people from one company sign up, and we don't want them to wait to start doing something and start paying us before we have more of a technical discussion with them. So we use those signals, like this is an enterprise company, the VP of engineering has signed up, and like X number of people have signed up in the last 7 days. This is the time they're evaluating it. Let's put a technical resource. So that's why we had this technical sales team who would reach out to them and who would identify their use case and help them grow and understand how can they use Heroku. Then we also added behavioral data. Not every user is ready to purchase from you, especially in a PLG world on the day one. They want to evaluate, they want to test, they want to see if this is something that they would want to use in the long term. And as they start using the product, you identify these key signals. If they do this, then they are more important. If they do next activity in the journey, then they are more important. And what we did was we identified the breadth of the features that they would use, as well as the depth of the features they would use, how frequently they would use, and use that as a signal for identifying that these are more important users. So for example, at Heroku, what we identified is that there are three-step process. One, they should deploy an application because they came to Heroku and they have a code and they want to deploy an app. Then next thing is they should add a data store. What is an application without a database? Nothing. It's a project. So they need to add a database to that. And we offered that data services. And the third part was they should add a third-party add-on or a logging or a monitoring service. That's when we know that they're really trying and they care about this application. And that's when that becomes really, really important for us. That was like the initial three-step process that we identified for most of our users that they should go through. And we build our entire onboarding according to that.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's just really awesome to hear like all of the amount of data and the different ways that you used it. I think a lot of companies that I'll talk to are sort of at these starting stages of collecting it and being a little bit unsure about kind of where to start and which pieces that they should use to kind of, kick off their strategy. And we usually try to help them identify like some of the low hanging fruit, at least as a good starting place to see, like, look what can happen if we're looking at this data. But it's really
Yes.
great to hear from, having built this like monster of a of a machine. I mean, I know from your point of view, you're probably like, well, there was so much more we could have done still. But
There's always more
but it's still really
that you can do.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And so you had multiple product lines at Heroku, and you talked about, having been purchased by Salesforce. And so at what time did the team start thinking about cross-selling, and how did you work this data into sort of that cross-selling process as well?
So that's a great question, right? Salesforce is a big monster juggernaut mothership that we are proud to be part of. And there are hundreds of thousands of customers who are using Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and Salesforce Platform, and several other clouds that we offer. So it was actually much later in the journey. We were first focused on growing the Heroku self-service. How can we start from getting the developers to start paying us? Then it was more around how do we expand from the Heroku offering itself? How do we convert from Heroku self-service to more of a Heroku enterprise customer? And how do we get them to use multiple products that we offer in Heroku, from the compute, from the data services, and make them more sticky? Because that's the key. If they're not sticky, like there's no point in cross-selling any other thing because they're gonna churn. The last piece was like, as we determine what's the next phase of growth is gonna come from, it was from making sure that the customers become more sticky. And how can they become more sticky is like leveraging other Salesforce products so that the overall value to Salesforce and the customer increases. And it was a two-way process. And Salesforce is a huge company. There are different departments selling different products. There are different sales teams selling different products and platforms. So the first thing that we did was we built a partnership on how can we offer Heroku customers and how do we integrate them for selling Sales Cloud, Service Cloud to those existing customers. Different personas, but the use case still makes sense. And as part of that, we also started identifying who are these small, medium businesses who are using other Salesforce products, how are they using it, and then leveraging based on the ICP that we go after in Heroku from the demographic and firmographic side of the world, and then put the right value prop in front of them and get them to start using Heroku. And that was the key thing. And there was one thing that really helped us was using technographic information. So for example, if there is an existing Heroku customer and they're using some of our competitive product on the Salesforce side, then we know that they are the right candidates for us. And we know that if they are using those products, then they should be either using Salesforce CRM or Salesforce Service Cloud. And we offer that integration from Heroku to Sales Cloud. So that was the key hook that we used to identify and go after that key segment as a signal for us to say that these are the right customers to go after.
Got it. And before we shift on from Heroku, because I do have a couple other questions about some early stage product led companies as well. But before we shift off, one thing I always like to talk about on the podcast is around pricing and how you all thought about pricing and how that maybe shifted over time and sort of like what your approach to pricing was.
Yeah, so you may have heard from other folks like Twilio and other companies, like we were also consumption-based pricing. And the more our users use, the more they would pay. And the incentives were clearly aligned for us to make them more sticky, make them to use more parts of the platform so that they would start paying us more. And for us, we had multiple vectors on pricing, as I said before. One was the consumption, one was the different product offering, and the third was the different features that we offer to make them more sticky. So we clearly use these three vectors to expand and scale some of our existing customers, either who are using for free or who are starting to pay us for one part, and then we scale their consumption. So pricing for us was more flexible and consumption-based on the self-service side. And on the enterprise side, we still manage to estimate the consumption that the users would have in the 1-year contract that they would sign. And we use that actually as a signal to more upsell and cross-sell. For example, the customer has bought an annual contract worth of this much consumption dollars and credits. And we clearly see that their business is doing well, they scale on Heroku, and they are leveraging more than what they have actually signed for. So we build telemetry within the product to tell us that. Customers who are reaching their limits, customers who are going over their limits. And trust me, in a consumption-based model, that's the gold mine, because you know that these are successful customers. And what we did was we actually leveraged that signals, not to ask the customers to pay their bill, the overage bill, but we use that as an opportunity for our sales team to have a meaningful conversation that, hey, your business is growing really well. Have you tried using some of the other products that we offer on the enterprise side to make it more secure, to make it more scalable? And actually, we ended up having an annual contract expansion more than what they would have paid if we just asked them to pay the bill. So we use that as an opportunity to cross-sell versus just asking them to pay the bill. So that's how we leverage our flexible pricing and the consumption-based pricing in the favor of customers. They are benefiting for us, and they are paying for more of the Heroku side of the world.
That's actually probably the most common example I'll give folks for a starting signal to build is what's the gap in your pricing? Are people approaching whatever your pricing setup is? If it's usage based, are they approaching those limits? Well, there's obviously a clear conversation to be had there that has value on both sides. Same with if you have a seats based model, there's a, when you're approaching the seats limit, there's a conversation to be had there. So very similar thinking. Something you also mentioned is that in your current work, you're working on advising some early stage product-led growth companies. So I'm curious, who are you usually working with on that side, and what are the common problems that you're helping them to solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give a background on my philosophy. So I've always led growth from not as a function within the org that growth sits in, but more as a business. And that's why I've always led growth team as more of a GM responsibility. That eventual goal is ARR and revenue. How do we get there is based on the problem that we are solving. So I manage teams across marketing, product, and partly sales over a period of my career. And my engagements are generally spread across that, depending on the problem they are solving. So one of the companies that is a Series B that I'm advising is more from the marketing standpoint, the entire marketing strategy, and I'm partnering with their CEO and their head of marketing there. And the conversations and the problems that we are trying to solve is how do we scale and leverage the freemium product signups, and how do we scale that, and how do we make sure that the sales assisted motion is working fine and the sales team is able to leverage the right signals and close the deal sooner. And the second engagement that I have is a Series C company in an observability space. The challenge that we are solving there is from the product side. How do we increase the adoption, engagement, and finding the right PQLs and PQAs throughout the journey for the sales team to focus on and for the self-service motion to scale so that the developers are using the product, engaging with it. We can leverage it either sales assisted or grow the self-serve business. So that is more from the product side, the product UX, the product adoption, activation, building the KPIs, the whole 9 yards from there. So it's a very different engagement. And that's what I really get excited about when it's not the same problem, when every company is facing different problems. And I think looking at growth from not marketing, not product, but looking at it from a business standpoint allows you to solve a much broader problem.
What piece of advice would you give to product-led companies that are just getting started in those early days?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there is one silver bullet that works for every company, but I think there are a few guidelines, right? I think you have to make sure that you are following that. So there are three big things. One is, are you focused on the right problem? Are you measuring the right KPIs? And is there an organizational alignment across the business? You can never win in a silo in a growth organization, even if you start PLG. And if you are starting product-led growth, and if you are in an early stage, I think the key focus there should be getting the quality acquisition, but that also activates and comes back. So think of it as if you're measuring signups plus activation plus return rate. I think if you find that, then you would have a really good base of users who would be using your platform, and then you'll be able to monetize in the future. I always say that for early stage companies, don't focus on monetization only if you're starting PLG. Focus on the engagement. If the users are sticky, and they would pay you. If you just focus on monetization, you would piss off a lot of the users early on. But it's very different, right? From if you are already an established company with a sales-led motion, you have $50 million ARR in motion, and now you want to become PLG. A very different advice that I give to them. For them, it's more around number one is the organizational alignment, sales buy-in, and how you would measure the success of growth. Because a lot of the times, like growth should not be responsible for monetization immediately, because then you would interfere with the sales team and it would break those relationships. So the number one thing that I say is that how do you identify the right metric that you're going to focus on, and which would be more of a PQL, the sales assisted motion. How are you helping influence the sales team, close more deals, close deals faster, and focus on the right prospects? I think that would be the key focus. And then you move more towards the PLG acquisition and the self-service. If you go directly to self-service, you would break that momentum that you already have in your company when it's generating and it's running really well from the sales motion.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. And I like that you did kind of parse it out between, if you're sort of making that shift to product led, there's a lot bigger things that you're sort of working with there. So I think that's a good way to think about it. We're coming up on our time here. I've probably already kept you too long, but there was so much to unpack. So where should people go to learn more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, definitely. So LinkedIn is the best place for me to go look and connect with me. I have my plans to get started on Twitter. I haven't made it yet, but I should do that soon. But LinkedIn is the best place for now to reach out to me. Also, Hypergrowth partners.com. That's where you'll find what we do, as well as connect with me and learn more about the companies that I advise on.
Awesome. Well, Rajan, thanks again. I really appreciate you spending some time with us, and it was awesome to have you on Product-Led Revenue.
Likewise, thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this new wave of the PLG products and the CRM that are being built. So I'm super bullish in this space.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Product-Led Revenue. This show is brought to you by Correlated. the first platform built for product-led revenue. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow the Product-Led Revenue podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit getcorrelated.com/podcast to get access to all of the latest episodes.